we will keep the house open for Q&A largely, and we'll try to devote majority of the time towards Q&A. Now, just to put you to perspective in terms of our time zone difference, so possibly we'll try to do this in exact 60 to 65 minutes once we kickstart this at 11:30, which is because Dr. Stephen Harris is in Sydney, Australia. So there is a time lag or a time difference of almost 4.5 hours, basically. So I'm sure this will be early evening in Australia, Sydney right now. So what we'll do is we won't really keep Dr. Harris waiting for too long. So in that case, we'll try to restrict, as I said, all our questions. So possibly may not be possible for me at least to take up all the questions. If you also see that we do not have a chat enabled in this session largely, purely for the security reasons. And more than that, whenever you have a question, as I said, we are fairly keen to have your questions being taken up. So either we can have a quick show of hand or a reaction, which can be a thumbs up. And but the only thing with thumbs up is usually that I miss out on all those reactions which are on multiple screens, example. So on my display, I may end up getting only one screen, which has, say, 25 all people plotted. So I would rather say we can use a show of hand, which I'm sure by now every one of us know how to take care. So why I personally feel this session is fairly important, because those all of you who attended IPN's voyage, we concluded last, in fact, on the 28th, so exactly 10 days ago, we hosted IPN Voyage, the global confluence of school leaders. And to my surprise, we had a great set of not only the speakers, I would say, but the sort of deliberations which we had. It made us think that we should all start looking. Obviously, everyone tries to think beyond our local fabric. But then at IPN, we then made a conscious call. Obviously, we've been planning it for a good 45 or 30 odd days. So here's Stephen Harris. Good to see you, sir. Good morning. Good morning from India, but I'm sure it is good evening in Australia. Good to see you. Yeah, so the idea was to bring in thought leaders from not just from India, but from across the globe, actually. And I'm very, very thankful to Dr. Stephen Harris, who was not only the keynote addressee at the IPN Voyage, but more importantly, he was kind enough to accept my invitation to be with us this morning and share his experience. Very, very distinguished leader, ladies and gentlemen, very, very distinguished career. In fact, when I spoke to him over the course of last 30 odd days, the more I speak to him, the more I in fact, get in awe in terms of his work largely. He's been through and through with the schooling fraternity, almost 3 decades with the schooling fraternity, largely because I think now he's spending his time between 2 cities, which is Barcelona and Sydney in Australia. So having said this, I will develop upon 2 aspects largely in today's, if I may say, today's deliberation, which is largely around, one is how Dr. Stephen Harris really brought a major change at the level of his previous school, which he used to head. I mean, he was the deputy principal of that school for 10 years, and then he was the principal of that same school for almost 17 years. So it's very, very distinguished, as I said, pedagogical leader from Australia. I would say he's possibly got all sort of awards in the Australian context largely. So it is only, I would say it was only fair when we wanted to bring in a school leader from the global context. I think Stephen Harris, by default, for me, in whatever limited, if I may say, reach we have into the global context, we thought he'd be the best person to kickstart this. So I think we are, again, as I said, we are 5 minutes away from our official start, but then I'm just trying to set the context right so that we largely save on the time, and we in fact, specifically talk about which will be of benefit to all of you as to what all good practices can we adopt from Dr. Harris, possibly leadership from the Australian context largely, right? So these are hygiene stuff, anyone. So I've right now muted all of you purely for the reason that there were a lot of disturbance coming from your end. However, as we go along, I'll try to, as I said, I'll try to give you that power of unmuting yourself. That's an important power in Zoom. Otherwise, you start feeling a little handicapped. Okay, so anything else and in fact I've been reading some interesting stuff, by the way, and don't take me otherwise when I throw this to you. I was reading this study by MIT yesterday, which is the Sloan Business School there, and they said that and this is for Indian audience largely, because this is all Indian audience here, majority of us are here. By February 2021, India will have on an average 267,000 COVID cases on a daily basis. Now that's a very difficult stat for me, because when I read that stat, I said, my God, where are we headed with this? So, but having said this, don't take it with a pinch of salt. This is just possibly it may go horribly wrong as well, but we need to be prepared for a little long haul. I personally feel this is not going anytime soon anywhere. And obviously I'm quoting you something which is very, very credible. MIT is very credible, which is why I try bringing that up. Obviously now, once MIT will officially announce it, obviously it will come in press very, very strongly. But then I thought I should share with you on this, that eventually we are here for a long haul. Also, we will continue at IPN, at least we will continue to bring forth to you all these learning exercises. I'm very, very thankful to all of you who have joined us from across the country, in fact. So before going any further, let me quickly take 2 minutes to introduce Dr. Stephen Harris. Very, very, as I said, very illustrated career, but I'll just quickly take a few moments to make a formal introduction. So Dr. Stephen Harris was the principal of Northern Beaches Christian School, NBCS, in Australia, Sydney. In fact, Sydney is part of New South Wales, if I'm not wrong. He was there from 1999 to 2017 as a head, as a principal. Under his leadership, the school gained international recognition as an organization that was noted for leading pedagogic change in schooling. His design briefs for buildings have seen the creation of some of the most forward-focused learning environments enjoyed by the student and staff and appreciated by thousands across the world. In 2005, in fact, Stephen founded the Sydney Centre for Innovation in Learning. His vision was to embed innovation into everyday school practice. Stephen received recognition at the inaugural 2011 Australian Awards for Outstanding Teaching and School Leadership, which is AITSL, as the Australian Secondary Principal of the Year. Stephen was also recognized in 2017 as a recipient of the prestigious John Laing Award by Principals Australia Institute, presented to exceptional school leaders. So as I said, as I continue to read a very lengthy, if I may say, profile of Dr. Stephen Harris, but I think I'll stick to that introduction there and there. And more importantly, welcome, Dr. Stephen Harris. Good to have you, sir. We're right on time now. And by the way, he's a man of very few words. So I have also realized that I speak a lot and he's my contrary. So he's opposite of what I am. So however, I will insist this time around that he be a little more magnanimous and elaborative, but then obviously I cannot change his style. Over to you. Welcome to you, sir. Thank you. Right.
Thank you very much for your welcome, and I'm looking forward to sharing thoughts at this session. Yeah.
Lovely, lovely. So we'll kickstart this, sir, and I'll as I was outlining, and there are a few other leaders who have joined us. So we will get more people to join us, obviously. But having said this, Our idea of this session is, as we were discussing yesterday, largely to go back on your journey of your being a school leader in Sydney, and obviously you were a deputy principal there, and then you became a principal of that institution. But while I read about your body of work there, I think there are specific keywords which I think all of us like to hear from you at length, possibly today. So I'll restrict my questions to a couple of questions largely, because I don't want to make this more of a monologue, as I said. And then we'll open up the house for the Q&A largely, because that's a fairly interesting part of this entire conversation. So good morning once again to everyone who has joined us. My first question, Dr. Stephen, is while you were at the Northern Beaches School largely, what are, say, few elements you can, or possibly characteristic of a particular school you thought you were able to inculcate or nurture within that system, which you were part for so long, if I may say, and that was possibly your gift to the school while you left them, and still more of a, I would say, a legacy which you see it's all growing in that institution still, possibly. Yeah.
Okay. Now I should probably make one correction to your introduction. When I was deputy principal beforehand, it was actually at a different school in Sydney.
Okay.
So that was in the Blue Mountains. So in many ways, my 10 years as a deputy principal were quite formative for me in terms of what I would do when I became a principal, because I think as a deputy principal, you're often in a situation where you're responsible for the hands-on welfare and culture and outcomes of the school, almost more than principals at times.
Yeah.
So that I always viewed that time as a deputy principal as one that was preparing me for something else.
Okay.
I made the shift from deputy to principal on the advice of others. We had a program back at the original school called executive shadowing, and some of them followed me around for 3 days and then gave me feedback. The idea was that I didn't know that person at all, but I respected both their position and their ability to give reflective feedback. And that person just said to me, smiled and said, "Stephen, you're ready to run your own school. You know, that's what you should be doing next."
Okay.
So that was actually very helpful to get the feedback, because ironically, I never viewed myself as a leader. Through the school system, I was born in New Zealand. Okay. I went to schools in New Zealand, in England and Australia, and I finished up not liking schools at all. But then ironically, our government back in the 1970s in Australia were offering free university scholarships and money to people who did teaching. So I finished up doing that. I do come from a family where there are multiple educators. My grandfather was a principal. I had an uncle who was a principal. My father was a professor. So education was part of the whole world, but I really didn't like school. So I started off from an interesting perspective of feeling, okay, it's up to me to change. So if I then fast forward those initial years, sort of 15 years of middle leadership, classroom teaching, I guess every experience that I had helped shape ultimately my leadership as a school principal, because it was so important to have understood what is it like to teach 5-year-olds, what is it like to teach 18-year-olds, what is it like to teach in a government school, what is it like to teach in a non-government school. All of those things became an opportunity for me. When I became principal in 1999, it was an interesting context. It was a school that had been started by a church. After about 5 years, different financial issues, and the bank actually insisted that we became an independent school. So I was thrust into a context where I had to negotiate board changes and a whole range of things. But I guess again, it was a learning experience. So for me, being a leader is very much about being a learner and also being a servant. So that I know that when I first took over Northern Beaches, the first thing I wanted to do was to shift furniture and to get rid of some stuff because I just didn't like it at all. And I was told, sort of 6 months after the event, that a number of the teachers just couldn't believe that I was there shifting furniture with the grounds people and everyone else. And I thought, well, why wouldn't I? If it's a job needed to be done, you get in there and you do it. But I guess in some ways that it's a really important part of leadership is that every person in the community views you as their advocate, whether that's the cleaner, whether it's the grounds person, whether it's a parent, whether it's a child, whatever else was there. So I guess my starting point for leadership was around holding extremely high expectations of every person, where I gave them respect automatically, and I expected the best from them. So that whether they were the most difficult child or the most frustrating parent or the most challenging teacher, whatever else, I didn't let up on that notion that every person has got the potential to be the best if you can actually unleash that. And also, I guess from an educational perspective, had the original notion was if there was a problem with a child, it wasn't the child's fault, it was the system's fault, it was my fault. What questions have we not asked ourselves to enable that child to thrive? So I guess I very intentionally flipped the model of leadership to saying, as soon as I detected a problem, whether it be a teacher, whether it be a child, parent, whatever else, I would flip the thinking and say, what have I not done, or what have we not done that could have actually avoided that situation? And so therefore that opened up the freedom to question everything, basically, so that there was nothing that we wouldn't question in terms of our practice going through. The other thing for me is that I've always felt that team leadership is important. And although I was technically in charge of the team, I needed to make sure that I had a strong team around me and that I was listening to them as much as they were listening to me. So therefore, one of the things I rectified immediately was that there were no females in the senior leadership of the school. So I actually, as I became aware of the different teachers, invited two of the women teachers who I thought were outstanding in the classroom to become part of the senior leadership meetings, just so that we actually had a broader voice. So I think diversity is a very, very important issue, and people need to, I guess what we did then was we separated salary from position and said, no, we actually just need to get some more voices into the senior leadership team. You're still going to be a classroom teacher. We're not going to suddenly elevate you into deputy principal or anything else, but we need to get more voices. So that was an interesting journey. So yeah, I guess the starting point for me into that role of leadership was very much a servant leadership model. That's what I was used to. That's what I wanted. A team leadership model, and then a collective envisioning model, and that's what I finished up doing my PhD thesis on, was the power of collective envisioning. But I'm happy to either continue down that track or ask another question.
No. I think you did bring out the same question, which I really intended, was that while every leader has its own style of working, largely, all said and done, while you stay at the helm of affairs for any institution for as long as 70 or 8 years, that institutions become part of your DNA, and the DNA of that institutions become part of your DNA largely. So which is why, so I think collective leadership is something which, and possibly diversity at the leadership level of your institution, though they were not given positions as such, but the teachers were involved in collective leadership in a way, was absolutely, I think, a point worth taking for all of us largely. So as I said, while you were a deputy principal to a different school, and then you came to Northern Beaches, and then you were there for as I said, from 1999 to 2017. And I think you brought some interesting practices there. Would you like to throw a little more light on, while you said, while I read on your profile, is leading pedagogical change in schooling. What do you really brought as a change there, if I may say?
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, some of the other questions I asked myself was, I saw other schools that had glossy brochures around their strategic plan, but I only ever found pictures of ovals or buildings or a sort of a strategic plan which was to do with construction growth. And I didn't actually see any strategic plans at the time that were around pedagogy. In other words, where do we want to take the learning? And I don't know why that wasn't the case, because for me, that's what the schools are all about. So therefore, the conversations we started to have were, well, what's the pedagogic vision? What's our strategic plan? And how do we wish to take people forward in that context? And now, we did that in a I guess a fairly strategic way. I can remember back in 2001, just as the school started to grow and we had, I guess, a little bit more income from more students. At the end of the year, I worked out when the cheapest airfares were around to fly a group of 10 people, which was quite considerable at the time because the school was only fairly small initially. We went to Melbourne and to Adelaide, and we visited 6 other schools, which we chose to challenge thinking very, very deliberately, to sort of, they weren't like us in any way, but we wanted to see what was it that they were doing that intrigued us, and then what could we bring back to our own context. Now, I think that started for me the process of recognizing that probably the strongest professional development for leaders in a school is that collective voyage. And I love the word voyage in the recent conference that you had, because leadership is a voyage, a school is a voyage, and I guess inviting people to join that voyage was important. And I can remember the intense discussion we had that first night in Melbourne at a restaurant afterwards, where people were suddenly challenged with a whole range of ideas that they'd never confronted before, but immediately wanted to bring them into our practice. And so I guess that started this notion of collective exploration of ideas, and then saying to ourselves, well, what do we want to bring to us? Now that over a period of 10 years, that process evolved. And I can remember I took 6 people. We went to England in June, sort of, it was when our mid-year break was on and just before England was going off for their summer holidays. And we targeted 10 schools that had all scored outstanding results in every category of the Ofsted. Now, I'm not necessarily a fan of Ofsted, but I was intrigued to know what was it that these very, very different schools were doing that led them to be viewed as outstanding. And they were very different schools in very different circumstances, but again, in an intensive 2-week process, we analysed how did these schools improve student learning. We weren't worried so much about, we weren't going for the schools that were getting the highest marks. We wanted to know the schools that were actually improving learning, and we were being recognised for that. And then we would always, after that process, write a paper to spur the broader thinking on for the wider team back at Northern Beaches, to then say, I think we called that one, that was the Raising Achievement Tour, the RAT Tour. But we came back and we shared with the staff afterwards the key 6 points that we picked up, and really that helped us move into stronger understanding of student agency and student-centered learning. It helped us really question how are we using technology and how might we use it better. It helped us understand the role of student welfare in a more, I guess it really pushed us to the point of saying we had to guarantee that every teacher had the emotional capacity to be an implementer of positivity within the school, because we knew that if we wanted the consistency for every child, we didn't want to hear from a child that I love school except for teacher XYZ. We wanted them to be able to say that no matter who they have. We didn't want parents ringing us up during the summer holiday to say, I would like my child to be in class X because the teacher is good. We wanted to remove that notion that there wasn't a consistent experience. So we set ourselves that high goal of consistency going through. So that all came about through those journeys, and the Sydney Centre for Innovation and Learning came out as a result of that. That came from I can remember back in 1996, I'd gone to a seminar with a speaker on technology in schools, sort of only a couple of years into the internet. And that person had said that if you didn't have someone at the senior level of the school seriously looking at the pedagogical implications of technology, well, then nothing would change. And for whatever reason, that little comment had stuck. And so when I had the opportunity for my first deputy principal to be appointed by me, not one that was already in the school, I chose a person that could become the leader of the technology implementation process. And that was interesting, because within 4 years, we became the first school in Australia that was offering Year 12 online course options as well as face-to-face options. And that all came about because I guess we had someone that was focusing on that. But it was always a question then of, well, then how do we get every person on staff able to teach online as well as face-to-face? And so, again, this was back in 2005, and we set ourselves the limit, the challenge, and said, okay, within 18 months, we want every teacher to be able to provide feedback to parents using Moodle as a platform. So we knew that required sort of multiple layers of more expertise than just using Word or spreadsheets or anything else. It meant that they had to learn how to differentiate the use and communication tools within Moodle, and that was a higher standard. Now, what was interesting was that we reached the goal in 12 months, not 18 months, because we shifted all of our professional development for that time to being coaching on the shoulder. So we just simply said to teachers, okay, these rooms are going to be open after school. There'll be someone there that can show you how to do this. You can go, and we're not going to keep tabs on your hours, because you might want to just go for a quarter of an hour, learn something, but go home and try it out. So again, we started to have that level of confidence that the teachers were on side.
Well, that's very interesting, because as you mentioned, you're talking about year 2005, right? You guys were fully equipped to do what the world, at least in India, what we are trying to do now, if I tell you. So I think, which is a very important dimension so I'll break it down into few parts for us to elaborate on this largely. But before I go there, so one question I really want you to take up is that amidst this entire pandemic in India and obviously across the globe, one biggest challenge which we are as an educator seeing back here in India is, Dr. Stephen Harris, how to communicate whatever change we are trying to bring in our system to the very important stakeholder, which is a parent. Somehow there's a major, if I may say now, because as I said, I did not want it to bring the entire reflection of what is happening right now in a particular context, but then I think it will be worthwhile to ask you this question for a very simple reason, because right now, as I said, we are changing for the online piece. And I mean, if I may use a better word, is that we are metamorphosing into a phase that we were hardcore-ish physical schools to possibly creating a blend of, if I may say, a hybrid model, which is online and offline. But one biggest challenge, which I think I can get to hear from all the school leaders, and I'm sure everyone will vouch for it, how do we pass on, or we communicate this change to the parents largely, because somehow they're not getting the sort of support, if I may say, school leaders are getting from the parent community, if I may say.
Yeah. It's a very good question, and I think there are some practical answers. I guess for me, the issue with parents became something we got insight around. I can remember around 2014, 2015. The insight was that we needed to bring parents into the radar of our growth thinking. We talked about growing students, we talked about growing teachers. We then brought in, we have to grow parents. And so we actually made changes to the leadership structure of the school at the time, and said, we sort of felt that the positions that we had in the school, the titles we had, even the director of teacher and learning, they were all ultimately just repainting the old ship. And we actually weren't allocating resources and people to the tasks that were needed. And one of the big tasks we recognised was growing parent understanding going through. So we came to a collective decision. There were 35 people on the school leadership, either middle management or senior leadership at the time. And I said to them, okay, over a period of 4 weeks after school, one afternoon per week, are you happy to, let's rethink the entire use of all executive staff around where we want to go, not where we've been, but no one's going to lose salary or status. In other words, let's push aside the human fears, anxiety, and put that to the side. And so with that confidence that no one was going to lose status and salary, that anxiety was just parked. And we then gradually worked through a process where we worked out, well, we did need to have people who could stand up in front of any community, whether it was parents, teachers or kids, and provide immediate confidence going through. So we actually found the 3 people who could do that instantly. And so that again was very important for parents. So that person who finished up, in my case, being the head of the secondary school, actually wasn't responsible for the academic side of the, targeting the teaching program. I had someone else doing that. Her main role was to provide that confidence and to bring parents into the equation. So that also meant that, if we had a difficult child, or we had someone that was struggling with their results, or whatever the issue was, we would start off the conversation by saying, let's grow together. We need to grow in our understanding of you. You need to understand. You need to grow in your understanding of what we're trying to do educationally. And I always found that one of the most powerful groups within the school were hidden, and they were the parents whose businesses had led them to see that the world was changing, that they really understood where careers were going and where the world was going. And they became very helpful people in public meetings, because we always got them to speak first, or we interviewed them about their understanding.
They became your testimonials largely. They were your torchbearers, if I may say. Yes, correct.
Yeah. So I think with parents at the moment, if we think about the pandemic, is that it's no one's fault. It's the same with teachers as well. I mean, teachers have been trained to be solo operators, and I think that's the biggest problem for teaching at the moment, is that teachers have been told they're either good or bad based on how they can actually control or manage one little group of kids in a confined space. Well, I never wanted that. I want to have teams of teachers able to teach larger cohorts of kids with confidence, and so therefore that skill was something that I had to recognise they didn't yet have. And so we could never blame them for not having it, because they were never taught it. Now, I think for parents, we can't blame parents for not understanding the shifts in education, because possibly we haven't actually shared the journey with them enough. We haven't brought them into the equation for them to see it's as important for them to grow their understanding of education as it is for their child.
Absolutely. I think you gave just to paraphrase you in a way, that there are a lot of parents within our system which are a strong advocate of our practices. I think we as a school leader needs to give them the more of a talking job on behalf of us. Rather than we talking about our own good, I think there has to be an advocacy piece which should be driven by the parents for that matter. And I think a bunch of 510 would lead for 500 of them becoming positive, I would say. Right. So, because this is a major thing which is plaguing right now in our education system, Dr. Stephen Harris. So, for a very simple reason, obviously, India as much as I know, which is that India changes in every 100 kilometer or 100 miles for that matter. So, India has a very, very diverse land from southern to the east to the west. And obviously, barring the metros, I mean, barring the metro cities like Bombay, New Delhi, Bangalore, India still lives at the core of India is actually the hinterland of India largely. So where I personally feel the changes of technology are now seemingly, if I may say, thrust upon them largely. And then that transition from what they were to what they want to be is little tedious, if I may say. So hence it becomes, and more importantly, why I brought this up for a very simple reason. You guys pioneered the entire collaboration model, if I may say, what is collaborative largely, which we are talking now in 2005. And obviously that was not even an era of, I'm not sure of when was Facebook into vogue. So these are that time largely when we are talking about. Internet was for 4 or 5 years ago for that matter, before that. So coming back to this, Stephen Harris. So one more thing which is right now plaguing us, and I'm just taking your input as a leader, is that interestingly in the Indian context right now, which I did share with you, the entire fee issue has cropped up in a, so example, if we can say put a blind eye to say a fee issue, but there's an issue which has spiraled up to a level, and because I may choose this word, that somehow I see school leaders and parents are at the loggerheads. Basically, they have a say that no school means no fee. And at the same time, schools are obviously trying to say that the teachers are actually working, and they are genuinely working twice the effort they were supposed to put earlier, because for them technology is new. So I'm really making more of a, this is a more of a household question from India, if I may say. This is actually a talking discussion at every school leader's table today. And I somehow feel that instead of it making as either or situation, which is you are right and I'm not right, or you are right, I'm wrong for that matter, how do we address this so that there is somewhere or the other a middle path we can walk together, wherein parents possibly are lobbying now in a very strong way, and they are saying that while there is no school going on, how do we even ask for a fee, right? So if I may put a blind eye to a fee issue, but if I have to address that, how do these two entities can amicably work together? Any example, if you can quote, would be very helpful for us.
Okay, yeah, a very, very interesting question and dilemma going through. I think, first of all, the part of the solution lies in terminology that's used by every teacher. We've got to be confident that every person that's employed by us is professional in all of the statements that they make. And because it's so easy for someone to make a fly off the handle comment that could be misinterpreted, and could be misinterpreted as they're doing nothing, or something else. So I think the importance lies with teachers to understand their role as a professional, and to understand their role that, regardless of the challenges that they are trying to work through on behalf of the learners and the students, that's a constant challenge. It doesn't disappear just because they're online and can't be seen or whatever else. They are working with that professional understanding. Right. So I think the messaging from a school to parents about what the staff are involved in doing in very simple terms is important. One of the things I guess I was an advocate for at Northern Beaches was that it was never about me and what I said. Now, I know that in some contexts, parents want to always hear from the top or whatever else. And look, that was fine. They could see me in an image somewhere or whatever else. But I deliberately got people from across the school, the middle managers, to get a visible profile, because they started to talk about what was actually happening in the preparation of material or whatever else. So I would say, in the context of the pandemic, it's probably very important that parents are hearing from across the school community about all of the different things that are taking up the dialogue going through. And to even understand, and I know in Australia and other countries, politicians have got no real idea of what's been called in Australia dual teaching. I mean, if you're expected to teach some kids face to face and other kids online, you're going to be twice as exhausted because you're trying to manage two different things at the one time. There are ways around that, but again, I think it's lack of understanding and knowledge. So therefore, having that consistent voice, using the media and the communication tools that you have to convey the great efforts that teachers are doing in order to do those things. And again, the power of a story, if you can find, the individual stories in your community of where a teacher has done something absolutely amazing, then highlight that as the headline story for the week. We want to celebrate this going through, because it's going to help parents see that.
Yeah, so absolutely. So which is why, as I said, right now, I see there's a difficult transition at our level, mostly in India, and obviously the entire leadership is currently under a lot of pressure, which is why these questions to you. At the same time, I think a major takeaway is that I had a brilliant idea that talk about the positives and let the parents be the advocate of your work largely. I think that's a great way of doing it. So what I'll do is, I think my side of questions are done, because we are halfway through largely. So what I'll do is, Dr. Stephen, there will be, I'm sure, questions which will now pop up, and I really want to stick my neck out and say, let's have a lot of questions, because a fairly experienced leader among us. So let's take up questions, ladies and gentlemen, so that we can.
Very happy to do that. But I wanted to do one thing first.
Please.
And I can go for longer than I originally.
I will just give me a moment. Just give me. Yeah, please. Back to you. You can unmute yourself.
Okay. I wanted to talk about the processes that I went through to help the staff shift their thinking, because that's probably another little piece of the puzzle.
Sure. Please.
I'll share that just briefly. If I, as principal, was going to say to teachers that they should not talk for more than 10 minutes at a time in class, then I had to then take it on my own self as a leader. Now that was one of the biggest challenges I gave myself. Now I can remember the afternoon when we got all of the staff, about 150 people, into one giant room, and we said, if you think a teacher could speak from 0 to 5 minutes without stopping, go into that corner. If you think from 5 to 10, go there. From 10 to 15, go there. From 15 or more, go there. And the staff all looked very uncomfortable, and they finished up going to a corner of the room. Now, what was interesting was that there was a lot of faculty-based, section-based, younger primary were all in the 0 to 5. Language teachers, history teachers were all in the 15 plus going through. And then I said, okay, it's interesting to see what you've done. I'm going to walk out of here and come back in half an hour, and I want you to come up with one number that you're all going to agree to. Anyway, I walked out literally and came back half an hour later, and there were a lot of sheepish grins on faces. They came up with 7 minutes. That's what they actually ultimately agreed. And I said, okay. I said, from tomorrow, if you want to speak for longer than 7 minutes with your kids without stopping, you have to get their permission. Now, what was interesting was that the primary teachers, they didn't have a problem with that at all. They said, oh, we never do that anyway, so that's fine. And then the humanities teachers said, oh, that's fine. The kids love us. They love us talking. Anyway, they were quite shocked the next day when even their best students said to them, no. After 7 minutes, we switch off. and that actually started a really significant change in how we did teacher professional development. So for every, I guess, new semester, when we had like 1 day for the staff or 2 days for the staff, we became quite radical in the way in which we got people to rethink their positions. And one of them was we wanted people to rethink how did they put the furniture in their space. And we actually sent all of the staff with enough money to go to a coffee shop during the day, but they had to go and see 2 museums in the city and then any other space that they liked. And then they came back the next day and they had to then talk about what did they learn from that trip that they wanted to bring into their classrooms. And what suddenly happened was I had all of these people shifting things around the school for that afternoon because they were quite motivated. And so I guess if we're talking about hands-on learning experiences for the kids, if we don't put the staff through exactly the same process, they're ultimately going to struggle to shift from their pedagogic position, which is, you know, very, very traditional. So we did that in many different ways over many different years, where it was almost they were waiting for the game to happen because they were looking forward to what was it that was going to be quite challenging and different today that I'm going to learn. And I mean, one of the things we also did was we recognised that video, the video as a media was the media of the teenagers. And the teachers didn't actually have to either make videos or make films, and yet they were telling kids to make a video or a film. So we also had a building project happening, and so we said to the staff, okay, create mini teams so that, you know, again, they had to work out 5 or 6 people with whom they would work. They had to present this construction site of the school, which was being sort of the new buildings built, as if it was a travel documentary for tourists to come to. And it was interesting because by the end of that day, we had all staff capable of actually making videos, editing videos, uploading them, and then their ability to assist the kids skyrocketed. So again, I think it was being willing to take a few risks about how did we do things, which became a really important part of that change process. And ultimately, if you can engage parents in that sort of thinking as well, if you get them to become the learners in that context in some form,
Correct.
It helps them to see what you're doing pedagogically. Anyway, that's...
No, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. In fact, we've taken a leaf out of yours, and we have decided that after 30 minutes of speaking at the first half of the session, we will not continue in the 31st minute largely. So we've really implemented that. Having said this, I'll open up the question to all of you largely, and I think Trilokji, you have a question. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Dr. Stephen. Dr. Stephen, I was listening to you. I had an erratic network connection. I was going off and on, and twice I had to enter. I must have missed some part of it. But what I believe is, as a teacher, the first and the most important condition, precondition for a teacher is to have a unconditional love for the children. When I say unconditional love for the children, I mean, when we are talking about the experiential learning, we are talking about the student-led learning. Does it mean that there has to be some streamlined distance between the teacher and student when we are talking about unconditional love and giving the student-led classroom, where the children are leading everything, we are just the catalyst? Don't you feel at times the children take an advantage out of it? Then what should the teacher do to continue with the class in a systematic way and yet give an experiential learning by doing kind of a thing to the children? Just this much I wanted to ask. Where the line has to be drawn altogether, and how?
I think, well, we have to be able to balance the notion of unconditional love, which is incredibly important, with tough love. Now, they don't conflict. They can work alongside each other. A child can experience unconditional tough love, provided you have a relationship with them that is stronger than an incident that might occur or anything else. And I know that I finished up becoming the advocates for always the difficult kids in the school, because they needed an advocate. And sometimes this is probably as true in India, I would say, because it's true around most other countries. Teachers who get frustrated by a child will often be looking for a consequence that's far more severe than anything that would happen in the wider community for a child of that age. So that because they've been very, very frustrated in something that's gone on. I think the role of unconditional love and student-centered learning comes around. It doesn't happen overnight. You've actually got to move to that point where the kids have got confidence that they understand that educational goal that you're going towards in terms of the wider pedagogic vision for the school. And as that trust builds up, well, then the freedom to become far more creative will grow as well. I can give a very quick example of that if you wanted to. We trialled with 10, 11 and 12-year-olds the idea of what would happen if you had 6 classes together. So we had 180 kids in the context of one large space. It was larger than it would have been for 6 classrooms. We used an old library. We redid things in that context. So we built up this collaborative teaching model where in the 180 kids actually probably had one person who was their pastoral welfare contact and the person who was their advocate who actually really helped others understand that child. But then all of the adults in that space had to know all of the kids. So that was an interesting dynamic that we grew. But what actually happened was that, you know, per term, as we went through and that model grew, the kids became very, very confident within that wider cohort. And we lost a lot of behavioural issues because the whole nature of learning and the relational experiences were so different from what they had been used to beforehand. So that, you know, literally I had no kids sent to me for a few years out of classrooms because we started to change the culture. So the cultural shift was important. I can talk separately about some of the learning experiences that we would use to help that one grow. But that was, you know, it was the shaping the culture very intentionally, but that happens every day and it happens as everyone owns it.
Yeah. Nishi Singh, your question?
A very good evening. I have a question not related to the pedagogy, but I have a question since we are meeting and we have the opportunity to meet somebody from another continent and country. My question to you is that what kind of a, since you were talking about culture, what kind of a culture and value expectations and changes do we see in parents of today? In the sense that what we are seeing as school leaders is that there is a definite degradation of value system in the society. So, and more so, what we find is that the value system, the grilling of the value system, more or less has come as a responsibility to the school, with less parent participation on this. So, how do you feel this has affected in other continents? Do you find this is same? I would like to know, sir.
I think that's a global issue. You know, it's that question is relevant anywhere. First of all, again, it becomes part of our awareness, and we think, well, what we have to be observers of our wider culture, our wider values, and sort of see, well, what's actually happening here. And for me, one of the awarenesses that I grew was that the different influences on a family or on a child were so much more complex in the last 10 years than they were, say, 20 or 30 years ago. So therefore, we couldn't sit back and allow the culture to shape us. We had to shape the culture. So what did that mean? It meant that we started with the kids, first of all. We wanted the kids to adopt the values that the school had, the value of learning, as a subliminal adoption. In other words, they didn't even think about it. They came in through the school gate and they were totally on side with us. So we had to change that process and say, well, what was the student journey like coming into the school during a day? Well, for some kids, they were walking to the school. Others were coming by bus. Others were being dropped off. We literally had students trained to smile at them and say, hello, welcome. And so it was as simple as that. And what was happening over a period of a few years is that we shifted the culture of kids coming in feeling part of the community. We wanted them to feel and to understand, to value community, not to value being isolated going through. We wanted them to value respect. And so therefore all relationships had to be marked by respect. So therefore it was a conversation about what did that look like with parents? What did that look like with parents with us? What did that look like with teachers? And then we started to model it so that the idea of for me, aggressively shaping culture and values is a quiet process that everyone has to own, because you want people to come into the community and to not question the values or the culture, but to simply enjoy it. So that for me, again, is something it has to be an active process. And then you've got to look at what's the deficit at the moment. What are we struggling with? What's the value or the culture that's not quite clear? Well, then let's create a quietly aggressive process to address it. And when I say quietly aggressive, that doesn't mean you get out and you tell people off. It just means that you start from the grassroots doing it differently.
So that is a very positive way of looking at it, because this is a kind of a global problem and a very big one. So one has to think about it and keep working at it. That is what you said. Thank you so much, Dr. Harris.
Dr. Vidya, your question? We like to have a brief introduction of yours. Where are you from? Which city? And you can unmute yourself. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I'm Dr. Vidya Sravati, and I'm the founder of Reckleford International School and St. Peter's Modern School, and a college, which is a College of Education, UK College of Education. I'm from Hyderabad in Telangana, India. Well, I've been into the education sector. First, I was a professor at Usmania University, served the university for 16 years. And in the year 1999, I decided to, branch out of that and start with my own school. The first one was St. Peter's. We also have some play schools. Lovely. So that's my educational background. And I'm also the principal currently, holding the position of principal at Reckleford International School, where we have both Cambridge curriculum and the central board.
Most welcome.
I'm so glad to be here and to listen to Dr. Stephen Harris and also Mr. Gaurav Yadav, who's been very efficiently, moderating this session. I know that we are on an international platform this morning. It's about mid-afternoon today here. And there is one issue which is, I'm sure, a big issue dealing with students of all age groups, and that's the changes that happen time and again over even in short periods of time. So students today are all the time facing unknown or unforeseen emotional trauma, I should say. So how does the pedagogical style, change, or is it something that we keep transforming time and again to make it more packed with an emotional balance for students? As we've been speaking about the cultural, changes that happen because communities that we represent, when we have students coming from various backgrounds, because in our school we have students from the US, from Dubai, from South Korea, and so on and so forth, even from Singapore, and the Indian students. So we see that this kind of coming together of various cultural backgrounds is always impacting their style of learning. So the pedagogical style, if we may call it as inclusive in terms of cultural inclusivity. So how do we deal with it? Because there is also the emotional side of it, wherein students are coming with a different, background. And they are not coming from homes which are secure. And some of them are coming from even, homes where there is dad and mom living under a different roof. So this is the kind of challenges that we face all the time. I'm sure that even our children, when they go abroad, they do not have the same community or the same cultural background. So this becomes a big challenge for schools in India, because there are many schools, even in Telangana, where they offer, facilities for children coming from various backgrounds. Even we do have students coming from rural India. So you can imagine the kind of mix that is there. So my question to Dr. Stephen Harris is, how do we make it inclusive, and how do we deal with issues relating to students? I'm only talking about students, teachers have their own challenges, and of course parents have their own challenges, because their child is all the time mingling with children coming from, you know, better off or a different cultural background, I should say. So this is my question, and I hope we find some way forward. Thank you.
Again, a very good question, very relevant. I'm not sure whether you would have heard of the term VUCA, V-U-C-A. It comes out of
Yes.
American military terminology, but it's describing a world where we experience volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It's sort of describing the world that sort of emerged post 9/11. It's sort of, it's to describe that wider one. Now, 2020 is probably the best example, unfortunately, of that uncertainty and the complexity and the ambiguity and the volatility, because suddenly the entire world's natural operating systems have been thrown completely out by a pandemic coming through. I think first of all, to recognise that whatever the cultural background of the child, we're all living in this VUCA world. So that there is a wider unifying challenge for everyone. But within that, we then have to think about, well, as we develop learning experiences from the curriculum, we have to be bringing in ideas of coping with change, understanding multicultural perspectives, embracing the richness of different cultures. So we have to be looking at every possible opportunity to write that into the learning experience design, so that as we become, we want teachers to become designers of learning, not deliverers of content. And in the processes of designing learning, well then I think it's extremely important that they think through, how do we help kids cope with change? How do we help kids cope with, to enjoy the or the complexity of different cultures, and then enjoy the multicultural context going through, and how are we allowing time for that to happen? And I think one of the I'm about to start a series next week, to which anyone is welcome to sign up and join. It's looking at the issue of what questions should we ask ourselves as a school now about well-being, if we are very serious about it, because we can't really just say we're concerned about the kids' mental health. Now, if looking after our, in Australia, the city of Melbourne, 4.5 million people has just been given 1 day's notice to go back into 6 weeks lockdown. Now, this is after, they've already been in 8 weeks lockdown. They've enjoyed 4 weeks coming out, but they're about to get thrown back into 6 weeks more. The mental health issues there for kids are going to be enormous. Do we genuinely worry about that? And if we genuinely worry, does that mean we actually get rid of the final exams? Now, what is it that we actually need to suddenly really question deeply if we really want to help kids to cope with change? Because are the previous benchmarks critical? Maybe not. It may be far more important in the context, if we're talking about different cultures coming together, to create the learning experiences where the kids are going to grow in the capacities they're going to need to even negotiate the next 2 or 3 years. So I think it's really asking those hard questions. The workshop that I'm about to lead with Luca Parry is going to be around that. What are the hard questions we should be asking ourselves of what we currently do in a school that might have to get shifted or changed if we genuinely want to address the complexities that you're talking about going through. So I guess my answer is identify the complexities, which you seem to be doing very well in your context, but then get the teachers to say, what do we need to change if we want to really deeply address these challenges? Because I think we've got to be prepared to throw some things out in order to bring some things in.
Sure. Yes. It's really, I think, the fresh thought that has occurred to me from your answer, Dr. Stephen, is that we can shift our benchmarks, you see, for children coming from different cultural backgrounds, and also more than the learning outcomes, even the learning experience. needs to be, given more value. Also, we have what is known as the minimum learning levels and so on. So we need to categorize and see, how these students can benefit from the entire process. So thank you very much. And it was good to, interact with you. I hope we meet again. Even Mr. Gaurav, Dr. Gaurava Garu, I'd be happy to meet you again. Thank you.
I mean, there's one other comment there that we're working through in the Barcelona context. We have 15 different nationalities in our project in Barcelona, and 15 different languages going through. Now, we have English as the common language, but the one thing that it struck me is that my Spanish is hopeless. I'm trying to learn it, but if I was asked to write a response in Spanish, my vocabulary and ability to explain myself would be so much less than English. Right. So the question we're asking ourselves is, can we allow the kids to output in their heart language, even if I can't speak it? So, yes. So that if they're making a video or writing something, can they actually choose Russian? Can they choose Bulgarian as their output, even if I can't read it? And the answer has to be yes. The question is, how do we then give feedback on what they've produced? Yeah.
Yes, that's a good possibility. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you,
Shri Gaurav Yadav. Yes, thank you.
Most welcome. Thank you. Vasudha Masi, your question, and then we'll go to the final question, which is by Alpana Mukherjee. These are the two questions, and we're done with time, largely. Yeah. Vasudha, you can unmute yourself and ask the question. I'll move on to Alpana. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah, good morning and good afternoon, all of you. Thank you so much. Actually, I have some comment on Dr. Vidya's questions, because some practices which are very much aligned with Dr. Vidya. And I have a very direct questions to Dr. Stephen Harris, because this is the second time I have been listening to him, and I have noted down quite a lot of things, and it's really exciting for us. First, I would like to introduce myself, that I'm from Accra, Ghana, and my school is an IB World School. We are offering 4 programs: IB, PYP, MYP, DP, and the competency-based learning. There's a new one, that is IBCP. We just got authorized this year. So to go to first, I would like to comment on Dr. Vidya's these things, that Dr. Vidya, your school structure and my school structure is exactly the same, because we are also having a very diverse learning community. But the practice we have done it, for last 5 years, we have a strategic plan. And I love that thing, that very few schools are really working on the pedagogical strategic plan. So I'm very happy that we have really started doing that thing. So in our last 5 years, last 5 years strategic plan, we have developed the core purpose and the core values of the school, So what we have done it, we know that we have a diverse learning community. So we bring the students agency, teachers, parent, board of director, and all other stakeholders in the community to bring them together, conducted one workshop, and we develop a core purpose. And with core purpose, we define very clearly that we are a diverse learning community of learners. We need to inspire, empower, and transform. So our teaching learning process inside the classroom and outside the classroom based on this core purpose. Because whenever we face challenges in the behavioral issues or the cultural issues, then immediately we take the students to go back to that. Is your act inspiring others? How do you think? So this, we take them to that whole main component. And then we also have developed a core values. We have our 4 pillars of our core values. One is the greatness in everyone, creativity, innovation in everyone, service to everyone, and learning with everyone. So we actually live with the core purpose and core values, and which has really helped us in terms of practicing these challenges with the school, and it has minimized. Not only that, we also have set up an well-being department involving the students and the teachers together with the clinical psychologist who is experienced on that, and that that particular department is dealing with the students, all those issues. Because we have 45 different nationalities in the school, and even though the minority comes, they feel really threat. So first component in our school that we have to create a safe environment. So the moment we have started doing that core values and the core purpose, it actually reduced quite a lot of challenges within the teachers as well as the parent community as well as the student. So probably that can be a kind of, the structure of the model. You might think about it. That is one thing, one comment I feel like that I should share in this platform. And honestly, this is one of the rich platform I have ever been. I'm also in the ISA, international school in Africa, but IPN, it's so diverse. I think this is the beauty of this platform. So now I go to Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris, our next 5-year strategic plan is convert our school into a center of innovation and research. And I learned from your last week ago that the 2 days voyage, I learned that your center is really working on that, and you are experienced actually in that particular journey. So as a school, it is very important for us to contact with we are trying to contact different people across the globe, but something is not really matching with our DNA the way we want. But when you presented on that day, we feel like that this is something that it's very close to our heart. So I would like ask that how we can really contact and how you can take us through the whole process of it. Is it a consultancy? Do I have to contact you? What would be the process of contacting you to share your expertise or take us through the whole journey to convert, transform our school? Because this is the one part which we have to really work on, the transformation, and how we can transform our school from this system, to the center of innovation and research. So this is something we are really looking at it. And so how can I go about it?
Yeah.
Okay, there's lots in your question and your comments there. Before I actually answer the question that you just asked, I want to go back and make one comment because it might be relevant to a few things that we've already talked about. If there's a group within the community who don't get it, who don't understand what you're actually doing in the big picture, the problem is with the articulation of the vision. And then it may be even deeper than that, that the vision might be too confused. So that in one sense, if you want parents or parts of the community to become more engaged or more understanding, the answer there lies down into the clarity of the vision and the articulation of it, because you know that vision is vision if others are growing it. So you'll know that your vision is correct and understood if parents are growing it. If parents aren't growing it, well, then the problem is with the vision. So I guess that I just wanted to make that comment because that was relevant to some of the things you were saying in the first part there. In terms of creating a centre for innovation and excellence, obviously from my perspective, yes, I do have a consultancy process which I'm involved with Learn Life, and that can actually happen through Learn Life. I've also got a passion for Africa. I've worked in Rwanda for a month of every year for the last decade.
I had been in Rwanda 17 years. I was there. I was in a world school, IB World School in Rwanda, 17 years. I had that school too. Yes,
I've actually
worked in
I've worked in the regional schools in the Northern Province and some of the poorest areas. What I did notice there, though, was that any school could become a centre for innovation if you got the teachers to understand that it was they were the resource. That at Northern Beaches, when we created the Sydney Centre for Innovation and Learning, we didn't have funding, but we had a name. We had a name that ultimately any person could join. And we literally started off on a Friday afternoon with people saying, come and share your best ideas from this last week. You are going to become the foundation members of the Sydney Centre for Innovation and Learning. And then, so it was just a sharing process that gradually built. Now, as that grew over a couple of years, what started to happen was a consistency across the entire school. And then people started to come and say, how are you doing it? Well, I mean, all we were doing was saying we were actually empowering the teachers to understand and share the best of their practices, and people could see how the different threads of innovation were being woven together. But you know, as a longer term process, if you want something more specific, then you're welcome to contact me via the Learn Life process and talk with me there if you wanted to get more specific assistance for your school in your context.
Yeah. You'll have to unmute yourself, Mrs. Alpna. I think.
Thank you. Yeah. Automatically it has gone. Thank you so much, Dr. Harris. Definitely, I would love to get the contacts through the process of the consultancy. If there is any, we would love to contact you, and director and the board will be interested to actually hear from you. We will work on that. So that is what actually we wanted, and it's a lot of good insight you have given us. So
you can get my contact information via IPN, and
I will. Yeah.
Surely, we'll help you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we are completely out of time. So thank you very much, Dr. Stephen. I know it must be, what time is it now in Sydney? Must be 5:35 largely.
It's after 5 p.m. I have promised, because I lived my life in Barcelona time whilst being in Sydney, I promised my wife I'd take her out tonight. So that's what we're doing.
Oh, lovely. So thank you very much. We will not keep you waiting any further. So firstly, on behalf of everyone at IPN, I would like to thank you. Obviously, one hour is not enough to engage you, if I may say. So we will keep engage you more often. However, through a formal process, which we have discussed earlier. But thank you very much, everyone who have joined us from, I would say, largely India, but then I could see some leaders from across other continents as well. So thank you for joining in. I hope your time was worth with us, but I had a great time, Stephen Harris, for that matter. I would say you talked about culture and you talked about few threads which I have got largely. We should create a series along with this largely, and I'm just sharing a little precursor for all the school leaders, that we will tie up with at the IPN level with Learn Life, the organization which Dr. Stephen Harris is a founder of, in fact. And then we intend to make this a far more organized, if I may say, process where will possibly we have a series of, say, 4 deliberation, 5 deliberation in continuity. So this was largely, if I may say, a precursor to all those largely. So you'll soon hear from us on a joint effort with Learn Life and IP and how we can work together on it. Okay. So for now, thank you very much, everyone. In India, it's afternoon and everyone has to go for possibly lunch. So have a great lunch and have a great day ahead. Thank you very much. And have a great evening, Dr. Stephen Harris. And say my hi to your better half. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Gauravji. Thank you so much for bringing such a wonderful session to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Gauravji. Thank you, Dr. Harris.
Thank you, Gaurava.